Super. Well, before we start the meeting, I'm just going to wait for the Zoom to look good up there. Just a note to councillors that and staff that we're going to try to do a pretty quick meeting. So if there isn't any pressing arguments, then we're going to try to zoom through. You let me know, Miss Best, when we can start. Good to go?
Yep.
Okay, it's 4:30. I'm calling the meeting to order and acknowledging that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, Tla-o-qui-aht. Notice to attendees that the meeting is being video recorded and will be published on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel. Through unanimous consent, if there is no objection, I move that pursuant to Section 15 of the District of Tofino Meeting Procedure Bylaw number 1229/2016 as amended, the December 13th, 2022 regular meeting be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcasted on the District of Tofino's YouTube channel, and that the facility provided for the public to watch and hear the meeting be located at Municipal Hall 380 Campbell Street in Tofino, BC. Seeing no objection, motion's carried. Also through unanimous consent, if there are no objection, I move that the December 13th, 2022 regular council agenda be adopted. Seeing no objection, that motion is carried. Also through unanimous consent, if there are no objections, I move that items 4.1 to 4.2 of the consent agenda on the regular meeting held December 13th, 2022 be approved and received. Seeing no objection, that motion is carried. Ms. Best, do we have any public comments on agenda items?
Thank you, Mayor Law. We currently only have one attendee, so I'm just going to ask that attendee if they would like to submit a a comment to use the Q&A function that's in Zoom. And seeing none, I'm just going to pause for a second here and ask a second time. And seeing none, third time. Okay, there's no submissions for comments.
Super. And we'll move on to Mayor's report. First thing, this is the last meeting of the year and also Miss Best's last meeting. And I just want to say how much I've appreciated your input, and I especially want to point out to all the councillors who will benefit from the lovely consent agenda that is Miss Best doing. It's fantastic, and I wish you all the best as you move on. So thank you very much for all you've done for us. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I also want to point out I want to commend Island Health for their quick response. Learned a lot from COVID, and we can see that now with the uptick in flu in pediatric cases, and how Island Health has come out and contacted all the parents with children, and how the flu vaccine has been the uptake in that has been astounding. And I just encourage all parents to respond and get their kids the flu vaccine sooner than later. And finally, Mayor's report. I just want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays and a Happy New Year. And I've really appreciated this year, and a lot of changes have come, but they're great. So I look forward to seeing everybody next year. No delegations, correspondence. We have Soil and Invasive Species Working Group regarding local government soil and invasive species best management practices toolkit. We don't have anything for that, except was there going to be there was no presentation for that. I think the idea I had before was to refer this to the council grant stream. Any comments from council? We have item 9.2, Local Government Leadership Academy, LGLA. And this is upcoming February new elected official seminar series. For new councillors, this is something that is certainly recommended for new councillors. And the recommendation is that councillors able to go be authorized to attend? So I'm going to look around the room. Has everybody read that and aware and good? Who is going? I'm going. Let's look around.
like to go, yeah.
Councillor Anderson? Councillor Sawyer? Yes? No? Councillor Steer?
No, I will not be attending.
Okay.
Is it just 3 people?
As many as we can go.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sloman. Thomas, Councillor Thomas, Councillor Master, no. All right, well, then I will move the recommendation that let's see, Councillor Anderson, Councillor Thomas, Councillor Sloman, Councillor Sawyer, Mayor Law. Is that it? Be authorized to attend the Local Government Leadership Academy Elected Officials Seminar Series, February 15th to 17th, 2023 in Nanaimo, BC, and be reimbursed for costs in accordance with District of Tofino Council Remuneration Bylaw number 1254/2018.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor McMaster. Any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Motion's carried, none opposed. All right, moving on to presentations and reports. We have 10.1. BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Funding Application. Mr. Rogers.
Yes, thank you. Our pre-presentation for council.
One more, please.
Thanks. Good afternoon, evening, Mayor and Council. I have a really brief presentation based on the report that's in front of you today about the BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Funding Application. The purpose of me being up front of you today is to garner your support for a recommendation, supporting the grant application. And I'm going to step us quickly through why that's a great idea. Like, you may please move me forward.
Right arrow.
I know.
Here.
I just need to hit down arrows, only like 5 slides.
Unfortunately, if the button is pushed while we're setting it up, it will disengage the mouse. So just give me a moment, I'll restart the PowerPoint.
Probably good for memory.
I think you've got lots of support.
But yeah, if council doesn't need a presentation, I'm happy to.
Okay, one more second here.
Great. A bit of a background for council. This project comes out of some plans that we have for Mackenzie Beach Road in terms of upgrading it to a paved standard. It goes back to a zoning amendment that council considered earlier this year in respect to Mackenzie Beach Resort and the negotiations that we had with the resort to gain access to the beach for Mackenzie Beach Road in return for them allowed to park on our property, and then a transit turnaround as well. It also lines up with council strategic plans about improving our infrastructure as we can through grants and other items. Sorry, Nick, you're gonna have to. The Active Transportation Grant is a grant put up by the province that deals with active transportation, so building of multi-use paths, cycling, sidewalks. The grant funding is 70-30, so the provincial government would provide us 70% of the funding and we would be covering 30%. The overall Mackenzie Beach project is closer to $2 million. The portion of it that would be eligible for this grant is about $660,000-ish. And so 70% of that 660-ish number is 440,775. So that's what we'd be applying for. So roughly 25% of the overall project. One of the things that we need to submit the grant is a council resolution supporting it. We did submit the remaining part of the grant in October. And the province has given us an extension to tonight. If we're successful, I'll be emailing right after this to follow up with the rest of the grant application. I think we're familiar with it, but I'll just go over this really quickly. It's a paved road. It's currently a gravel road. It's going to include a multi-use path. We're going to have parking, washrooms, and beach access at the end. There may be a potential land transfer. So currently we have agreements allowing us, the Mackenzie Beach Resort and the District of Tofino to use each other's property. If this was to go forward, we'd probably formalize that through land titles. The designs that we've submitted to the province are Class B design level or shovel-ready designs. Quick graphic, just so you all know what we're talking about. The graphic on top is the end of the road, so the end closest to the beach. And there you can see where the future washroom will be, which is that little square white box in the middle. A pathway, the access to the beach. And you can see the light green parking spots would be Mackenzie Beach Resort parking. And the other parking spaces would be District of Tofino parking spaces. We would be putting a pay parking kiosk down at the end here as well. The graphic on the bottom is actually a series of 3 of these. I just chose one. This is the part of the road that would connect to the highway. You can see that white line that runs along the top there is the division of the road from the MUP, and then where the crosswalk comes across Highway 4 to meet up with that multi-use path. We'll be discussing this project in further detail if we move forward tonight through the budget process, specifically the next budget meeting, and looking at it as a whole project, so not just this grant part. And that'll help us sort of determine what the exact funding sources are going to be and from what funding reserves we're going to be pulling from. So the recommendations are here. I think they're the same as are on your report. And yeah, we look forward to any discussion and looking forward to this project.
Excellent. It looks very good to me. Question from Councillor McManus.
Will the MUP have a separating barrier because there's so many camper vans going down there?
I think the initial designs is it's a painted division at this point. So I don't think we've accommodated. I don't think we've costed out that many barriers. We do have a significant amount of those actually wider ones that are sitting in our yard that we can't put on the highway. And so we have talked about being able to use some of those because they are fairly sturdy. And this would be our road versus municipal transportation on the highway. So I can take that back to the designers as we get through to the next level of design and raise that with them.
Good. I'll move the recommendation.
Please do.
Okay, I'll move that the District of Tofino staff be authorised to prepare an application to the BC Active Transportation and Infrastructure Programme in the amount of $440,775.15 in support of the Mackenzie Beach Safety Upgrade Project. And that the District of Tofino agrees to fund the applicant's share of eligible project costs, and that the project is identified as municipal priority and intended to be completed by the end of 2023, and that the project is shovel-ready according to the criteria in Section 3 of the BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Application Form.
Second, Councillor Thomas. Any other comments from council? Looking up at the screen, seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you very much. Next one, we have signing authority update, and I believe this is a brief report from financial services.
No presentation.
There's no presentation. So this is really just housekeeping, and this is to give our corporate officer, Jamie Larson, signing authority.
I'll move that the staff be authorised to add Jamie Larson, Manager of Legislative Services, as a signing authority for the District of Tofino.
Second.
Second by Councillor Anderson. Any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you. 10.2, we have a zoning amendment, 615 Campbell Street, and this is permission to proceed, and I believe this is for the veterinarian. And I believe we have Mr. Thick. Oh, there you are.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. As was introduced, this is a brief presentation regarding zoning amendment application for 615 Campbell Street, and it is indeed the vet's office or clinic, I should say. Thank you. So moving right into our presentation. By way of background, the application was received on April 14th of this year. There is currently a TUP in place that permits the veterinary clinic use, and that expires in March of 2024. The intention was always to rezone the property. The TUP was just put in place to kind of get the use up and running a little bit more quickly than a rezoning application. The property is located right at the corner of Lone Cone and Campbell Street, Lone Cone Road and Campbell Street. Was previously used primarily as a sort of a lodge bed and breakfast for a charter fishing operation, but for the last little while has been used for a veterinary clinic as well as staff accommodation for the clinic. The proposal is really just an amendment to the zoning bylaw to specifically allow a veterinary clinic to operate on the property. All the other permissions would remain in place with the exception of short-term rentals. So we would be looking to remove both bed and breakfast permissions as well as vacation rental permissions. There would still be at least one, if not two, residential units permitted on the property. Those would be permitted to be used for long-term rentals. My understanding in speaking with the applicant is that they would like to use those for staff accommodation as well as to accommodate potential locum veterinarians. I believe there's one suite that currently exists in the second floor that is used for that purpose at the moment. But essentially all other permissions that are associated with the R1 zone would remain. Taking a quick look at some of our policy we use to evaluate these applications. The vision to action is generally aligned. There's really no change to density that we're considering. There's not a lot of environmental considerations in this case. The official community plan is supportive. There's some considerations for active transport that are definitely relevant to this application, but in general, the OCP is supportive of the application. The housing needs assessment doesn't really discuss, changes for commercial uses. However, the removal of short-term rental to add a long-term housing component to the property is relevant here and supported by the housing needs assessment. The multimodal transportation notes, that we support development in walkable locations. This is, again, going to be somewhat of a mixed use development, which is nice. There isn't a sidewalk along either the frontages of the property, which is a bit of a shame at the moment. However, there's a sidewalk leading right up to the property itself. Typically, just for Mayor and Council's information, where sidewalks are created by developers is usually at building permit or at a subdivision stage. We typically don't deal with those in rezonings. However, rezonings often lead into building permits, which is when the Director of Public Works and Infrastructure, at their discretion, have the ability to request what we call frontage improvements, which typically take the form of curb and gutter, sidewalk, those kinds of things. The land use demand study doesn't speak directly to these kinds of developments. However, it does support commercial uses along the main corridor. And looking at zoning, the zone is currently R1, which is just a single family residential district. Basically allows single family home with a suite as well as home occupations. Those home occupations include short-term rentals. So that could be a vacation rental or a bed and breakfast. We would be looking to remove those short-term rental permissions. However, we would be adding the permission to host a veterinary clinic on the property. Few planning comments, form and character. It is in the Gateway Development Permit area. This is a development permit that's issued by council that has to do directly with form and character. There are no current plans for renovation or redevelopment of the property. The applicant would like to use the existing structure to operate the veterinary clinic out of, which is what they have been doing. For council's information, there is likely to be a building permit necessary. My understanding is that hasn't happened yet, but in order to actually change the use, currently the existing occupancy is for a private residential use. As this has now become a commercial, basically a public sort of space, there's a few minor things that will need to be completed within the structure. They're actually quite minor, things like emergency lighting and the exterior door has to swing outwards and a few minor things of that nature. In general, not a significant building permit, but there might have to be some small renovations done to accommodate the change in use. Housing, there's not really an increase here, but we are moving what was an existing bed and breakfast to long-term rental. So there's a net win in general when considering housing. There is a current definition within the zoning bylaw for veterinary use. This veterinary use is actually confined to household pets. So we wouldn't be treating livestock at this particular location. I've spoken with the applicants and say that's kind of the intent of this location, at least, is not to treat livestock. So that's the existing veterinary use within the zoning bylaw would be what we continue to use in this case. Traffic access and parking, there's no initial concerns that show that that staff can think of that show that this particular zoning amendment will significantly change the traffic and access to the property. There's about 10 parking spots on the property, so staff feel there's sufficient off-street parking to support the use. This is something that will be reviewed through a referral process. We might look to our engineering team to provide any comments if they think there are any concerns around that. Similar for servicing, this isn't something that we're increasing density with, so servicing kind of needs will probably be fairly minimal. Again, we will be reviewing that by referral should the application proceed. Fire protection, I spoke briefly with the fire chief this morning. He noted that he has no initial concerns, but we will follow the formal referral. And the property is well outside of the flooding and tsunami inundation areas, so there's no major concerns there. Community amenity contribution, staff propose that it may not be relevant if we're looking at sort of the idea of land lift or overall, kind of value of the property that might change as a result of this zoning amendment. We are adding a use, however, also taking away a use, which is that short-term rental. So, and also due to the kind of general service that this will bring to the community, CAC may not be relevant in this case, but it's something that we can discuss should the application continue to be supported. DCCs will be assessed at a building permit. I spoke briefly about the need for a building permit to upgrade some of the basic parts of the structure. And staff are recommending to not hold a public hearing for the reasons that basically the property, the use, the proposed use is in line with the OCP. This isn't really a significant change to the property. There's not going to be any major kind of form and character or use change that is going to be noticed. And the use is actually already in place without any complaints. So at this point, staff, in order to streamline the application, recommend that we not hold a public hearing. That brings us to our recommendation that staff be granted permission to proceed with further review of the zoning amendment. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to speak to them. Thanks.
Excellent, Mr. Thick. Thank you. Do we have any questions from council? Yes, Councillor Anderson.
The suggestion is that the veterinary use would be added to the zoning. So what is the current zoning?
Thank you. Through the chair, the current zoning is R1, so it's a single family residential district. This is a fairly common small lot residential district, or sorry, residential zone. It allows for a house and a secondary suite, as well as accessory buildings and some home occupations. What we would do is have a sort of a specific note, or how we would probably accomplish this zoning change is have a specific note within that zone that says on this particular property, even though it's zoned R1, it's also permitted to have a veterinarian office on it. So we wouldn't be creating a new zone like we often do for larger projects, as this is sort of a more minor zoning amendment. It would be, I guess, what you would call a text amendment. It's still a general amendment. So,
okay, so just to follow up on that, so the residential use has to be in place for the veterinary use to exist if the proposal goes forward.
No, that's not correct. We could draft the zoning that way if that's the way council would like to move forward. But typically with uses in a zone, we have sort of a list of uses that are permitted. Sometimes you could have all the uses all at once, or you might only have one use. An example would be just next door, for example, where the Rhino Coffee House is. That particular zoning allows a restaurant. So, if the owner of the property wanted to, they could demolish the entire building and just build a small restaurant there, and that would still be in conformance with the zoning bylaw. So in this case, if the owner wanted to, and again, this depends on how we decide to draft the zoning amendment, they could demolish the existing building and run only a veterinary clinic on the property if that was how they wanted to proceed. My understanding is that they want to maintain some of the residential use for the purposes of staff accommodation.
Okay, I'll express the concern later though. So, thanks.
I just have one question.
Go ahead.
So because of becoming a public space with the lighting you mentioned, is the applicant going to be respecting the dark sky policy?
Yes, certainly. So the lighting that I mentioned is sorry, through the chair, the lighting that I mentioned is required by the BC building code, and it's exit lighting. So it actually is not exterior lighting at all. It's essentially in the case that, the power goes out, or if there's some emergency, there's some specific lights or specific like signs that guide people to the exits of the building. That's sort of what I'm referring to. It's just required by the BC building code and shouldn't impact exterior lighting or impact the lighting that's cast by the building.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Anderson, did you want to express your concerns to council, to staff?
Yeah, I'd express at the time of the motion.
Okay, in the motion? Okay, thank you. Seeing no other comments from council, would somebody like to read the recommendation and then we'll open it up for comment?
All right, I move that staff be granted permission to proceed with further review of the zoning amendment application for 615 Campbell Street, and that no public hearing be held in conjunction with the application.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor McMaster, and now we'll open up for comment. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, as I have in the past, I'm always concerned about loss of housing units when properties add or change to a commercial use. So I would prefer to see when we and I will support permission to proceed, but I'd be looking for a way of keeping the residential use on the property and the veterinary use as an adjunct to the residential use, rather than just that permission being added, because as the planner pointed out, they could destroy the residential units and just have a veterinary clinic there. And we've seen residential units before turned into commercial uses, or be adjuncts to commercial uses where there's more than one use allowed on a property. So I'm always interested in preserving what residential units we have, and I'd be looking forward to seeing what comes forward in terms of rezoning, with a mind to keeping that in place.
Good point. Thank you very much. Noted. And when we return, as the process unfolds, hopefully we'll be able to revisit that. Seeing no other comments, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? None opposed. Motion is carried. Thank you. We have 10.4 working outside district offices. This is a council policy, and this is a draft policy report from Legislative Services. Oh, sorry, this is actually for approval. No, do we have a report for this? This says no. Okay, has everybody read this? Everybody, all council aware of what's this working outside of district offices? I do have a comment. Just a little bit of a comment is that, and this perhaps is for council, is that, we don't get remuneration for our cell phones or for our Zoom rooms. But just a note to council that those are tax deductible. So if you do provide yourself with essential space and equipment, then remember to make those deductions on your annual income tax. That's a friendly comment. Seeing no other comments, would somebody like to read this recommendation?
I will. I move that District of Tofino working outside district offices policy, elected officials, attached to the December 13th to the 2022 regular council agenda be approved.
Seconded by Councillor Master. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion is carried. Moving on to 10.5, we have the 2023 council meeting and acting mayor schedules, and we have no report for this either. Any comments from council before we make this recommendation? Council,
I have a question through the mayor.
Yes.
Do we always have to wait for December for this? I remember there was a time when this was the first thing council ever approved. I mean, just from a personal, I started getting booked up for March in November, December. So I wondered if there was any chance in the future we could get this earlier in September-ish. I mean, we know when AVIC is, we know when UBCM is. Those are things that affect it. And I know that it's usually the 2nd and 4th, but there are, there can be changes.
Through the mayor, the meeting procedure bylaws prescribes that this happens in December. So if council would like to have this schedule posted and approved earlier, we could certainly do that. It just would be outside of the meeting procedure bylaw. But doing things early is not something that this bylaw speaks to.
So we could take that as a minimum standard by December, but we could do it.
Yeah, that's it.
Great. That's a good point. Thank you, Councillor McMaster. If there's no other comments about the schedule itself, then we can read the recommendation.
I can do it. I move that the 2023 regular council and committee of the whole meeting schedule attached as Appendix 1 to the report titled 2023 Council Meeting and Acting Mayor Schedules dated December 13th, 2022 be approved, and that councillors be designated to serve as acting mayor in 2023 in accordance with Appendix 2 as attached to the report titled 2023 Council Meeting and Acting Mayor Schedules dated December 13th, 2022.
I'll second.
Seconded by Councillor Thomas. All in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. Thank you. No bylaws. We have business initiated by council members. Well, we have Councillor Sloman with the Tourism Tofino update.
Yeah.
It's okay. You're doing great.
So I went to the meeting and they have the Tourism Tofino has a new executive director, Brad Parcel. And at the meeting, we reviewed the 2022 occupancy trends and projections for the winter months. And it has been reported that the occupancy Tofino had its very busiest spring ever, and the summer months were slightly down, more reflective of 2019. And the fall and winter, as we've all probably noticed, is definitely a bit slower than usual, more reflective of, again, 2019 numbers. It looks like tourism is gonna come back a little bit, get busy again in the spring. And due to the decrease in tourism, Tourism Tofino may have to look at advertising again a bit more, which they have been doing very limited since 2020. And again, at the meeting, we discussed the scholarship, and we formed a scholarship committee, which will be meeting in January.
Super, thank you. Any questions for Councillor Sloman? Councillor McMaster.
Are there any thoughts to the fact that Tofino might be pricing itself so high that to care a lot of tourists these days? The economy the way it is.
They did look at that. That was presented. Tofino's numbers are really quite higher, reporting higher than many other municipalities. And that was discussed, and it was not really, they're gonna investigate those numbers a bit more because we're also comparing ourselves to a lot of towns which don't get the tourism like we do, so their numbers aren't. You know, we have really nice beach resorts where some of these ones might just be motor inns, but that's definitely been investigated or being investigated.
Excellent, thank you very much. Let's move on to Councillor Sear, ACRD and Harbour Authority.
Great, thank you, Mayor Law, and through the chair. This there are a few very relevant conversations that were at the West Coast Committee meeting as December 7th, so please bear with me. There are some, the first one that came up that would be of particular interest is there was a draft MOU to develop a protocol with Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation over the Long Beach Airport lands. And just a quick bit of background on that. In June, TFN presented to the West Coast Committee around the airport lands and the long relationship that they have had out there. It started back about several thousand years ago, but more recently with the federal government during World War II, there was an understanding that those lands will be taken over and used to develop the airport that was there. Subsequent in that conversation that it was always understood that those lands would be back with the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nations. So in 2000, the feds transferred those lands, those airport lands, to the ACRD. And there was very little engagement with the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nations at that time. Subsequently now, as I said, in June, TFN presented to the West Coast Committee. And at that time, there was looking for a pathway to have an agreement about how those lands might be able to partner with TFN into the future. There was a recommendation from the West Coast Committee to the board to look in what that would look like in terms of staffing, finances, to bring that forward. And so that came to the board of the MOU that was brought forward to develop a long-term protocol agreement. And so that in this MOU, this will be about 3 years in length. And in that time, a lot of work will be done to put together a much more comprehensive protocol agreement. There's a lot of interest in work that is going on out at the airport lands right now. And it aligns very clearly with the ACRT strategic plans about engagement with First Nations, aligning around reconciliation, protocol agreements, and partnering efforts. So this initiative is seen as very positive from the ACRT's perspective. There will be a few key elements within that protocol agreement that will be inclusive moving forward. Some of the key items there, and there are several around the acknowledgement of those unceded lands, around there, the acknowledgement of the hereditary leaders, and have those acknowledged and displayed prominently there. And other important aspects around consultation on the actual land use and planning to ensure the needs of both parties are being met. This will lead into the next part of my presentation from the ACRD around long-term plans there. And just the way that we're looking, that the ACRD has been looking at financing this, because there is an understanding that from the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation, the involvement will be long and extensive, and that there will be the ability to finance that from the TFN. So there's a proposal to increase the passenger fee at the airport from $5 to $7.50, a $2.50 increase. It's projected that will be approximately $27,500, and that will be remitted yearly to the TFN for use in this negotiated process. So that's the quick on that. The recommendation to the board was to proceed with that MOU, and that board meeting will be coming up tomorrow. And I'll be able to give a further update at our next council meeting. The next one that leads very closely into that was back last year in 2021, the West Coast Committee, with this increased demand and changes that have been happening at the airport, the board recommended that the Long Beach Airport, a land use and development plan be put together, a long-term one. The last one was done in 2007, and that plan is completely irrelevant in today's, for a whole variety of reasons, and I won't go into those, even though I have them all written down here in case you're interested. So it was decided back then that we needed to find out a way and a pathway forward. That came forward at the West Coast Committee, and that long-term plan. There are some financial implications that are involved in that, and I won't go into all the details again. But there was a strong recommendation that we proceed with that long-term planning process, and there was a financial pathway that was laid out to cover that, with limited to almost zero taxation implications to the ACRD and subsequently out to us in the municipalities for those tax requisitions. And it is an important one. There has been an incredible amount of development pressures out on their airport lands. There's going to be an expansion of the airport terminal. There's been upwards of 20 applications for long-term leases. The list goes on. The last one that I will touch on is that you may be familiar with, for those that were at UBCM, the West Coast Transit. We had a meeting with the Ministry of Transportation. The ACRD had a meeting with the Ministry of Transportation regarding the BC Transit service, the public transit service to be initiated out on the West Coast. We were informed at that meeting that the BC Transit will not be funding coming into the new year any new services. They're still working on rebuilding the services that they already have due to the COVID and the slowdown in services and bringing that up. So that was, of course, disappointing to hear. The transit plan has been in place since 2018, and things had been moving forward for up until now. So in the interim, what has been suggested through the ministry at the time and brought to the ACRD board and the West Coast Committee at this point was an undertaking of an alternative option study for public transit on the West Coast. So that was laid out a very clear pathway, which would be the hiring of a consultant to move those, to look at the options that would be available. Staff have identified that consultant who has a long history in this exact area. And the recommendation from the West Coast Committee was to proceed with the hiring of that consultant who would be able to look at those options. And it also, in consultation with the West Coast, there was the West Coast Transportation Working Group, which was established in 2017 and helped very closely with the transportation plan that had been put together for 2018 that we were hoping to be supported. And Mayor Law, I'll look to you. I know that it's been reached out to the municipalities, and I'm hoping that your voice will be there. And I don't know if a formal invitation has been brought forward yet, but I'm hoping that will be. Marcia DeWitt has been putting that together, and I know there's been some correspondence back and forth. Also in consultation with the transit consultant, Watts Consulting. They also have the ability to further, once options are identified and brought forward, they have long experience in implementation of those options. So that was another component to moving forward, and that we were looking at. The cost for that consultant, the first stage of that is about $12,500. The financing for that, once again, is already in place. We have a surplus, we have a reserve for the implementation of the transit service, so that is not there at this point. So those funds will come from there. There's also a grant opportunity that staff are going to be looking into to help offset even some of those costs as well. It will be noted that it is still, the board is still, the West Coast Committee is still very clear in the fact that ultimately the best option is BC Transit to deliver the service on the West Coast, and that we're hoping that this will be an interim measure until once again we can have the conversations around including the transit service on the West Coast in the BC Transit budget, hopefully maybe in 2024. If there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer those. That's it in a nutshell on the West Coast Transit next steps and options that were presented to the committee.
Excellent. Thank you. Did you have sorry, I missed it, Harbor Authority?
Yes, I do. And just a quick little note from ACRD. Once again, everybody's probably saw that the new garbage and organics pickup has started to sort and go, and report back is so far it has been excellent, well received. And one of the quick little notes they wanted me to bring forward is for the organics, and one of the things is securing those on your premises. The Windsor Plywood has already sold over 100 anchoring systems for those organics, and there was conversation around the Tofino Co-op carrying some of those anchoring systems and conversations with Slag Lumber. There's been a huge response, and the public has really been very supportive in both our communities, including Tofino and Tla-o-qui-aht nations have already had theirs rolled out, and it has been very successful as well. So I'll finish off with a quick Tofino Harbor Authority update. We had a board meeting on December 8th. I haven't had an opportunity to update council in some time. We hired a new manager back, the Harbor Authority hired a new manager back in June. And I have invited the new harbor manager to speak to the new council in the new year And so I will leave my Harbor Authority update to have our manager come to council to tell you all things wonderful about the Tofino Harbor Authority.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councillor Steer. Any questions for Councillor Steer? None. Then we're moving on to question period. Ms. Best, do we have anybody signed up for question period?
Thank you, Mayor Law. We have one attendee right now, so I'll just ask the attendee, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function in your Zoom window. Just pausing here for a moment. And have no submissions or questions.
Okay, super. Then I'll move us into closed session. I recommend that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to section 90 of the community charter to discuss matters relating to one, a personal information about an individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent. 1B, personal information about an identifiable individual who is being considered for a municipal award or honor who has offered to provide a gift to the municipality on anonymity. 1C, labor relations or other employee relations. 1J, information that is prohibited or information that, if it were presented in a document, would be prohibited from disclosure under section 21 of the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act. 1K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a municipal service that are at their preliminary stages, and that, in the view of the council, could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the municipality if they were held in public. 1L, discussions with municipal officers and employees respecting municipal objectives, measures, and progress reports for the purposes of preparing an annual report under section 98 annual municipal report. Seconded by
Second.
Councillor Thomas, please. Thank you. All in favor? None opposed, motion is carried. We're going to be moving into the closed session. Yes, 5-minute break, 5-minute recess while we move